Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to our Bible study. We are in Isaiah chapter 10 today. We are going to take a look at a number of themes, but one big one is about how God works across national borders to accomplish his will in the world. Still a lot of relevance and application of that in the modern day. So if you'd like our PDF, you can download it for free on our website. Let's get into the text. Okay, so here we go. Our first page today is going to look pretty familiar. We've talked about how Isaiah's prophetic ministry spans the reigns of 4 kings in Judah, perhaps 5. But King Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, and also Hezekiah's son Manasseh. It seems that Isaiah was still alive and may or may not have been continuing to prophesy. The events of Isaiah 10 and the prophetic words that are spoken here took place during the reign of Ahaz. Our key figures in this chapter: Isaiah, God's prophet, who's speaking these words; the citizens of Israel, the people of the northern kingdom of Israel. They had been rebels against God for a long time. And we also have the Assyrian Empire. Now, they weren't great as well, but God was going to use the proud king of Assyria and his army to punish the immoral people of Israel. And then in terms of definitions, there's so many places and names that you can look up in this chapter, and I'm just going to have to leave those to your own personal study. But we will take a look, just point out one that we saw yesterday, and that is the name Jacob. Now, Jacob originally refers to the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. His name is sometimes used, and here it's used to refer to the collective nation that grew out of the 12 tribes, which is the nation of Israel. For our outline today, we have a little bit longer chapter with 34 verses. Let's take a look at the first 4 first. Continued rebuke to Israel's officials. God's been rebuking Israel in the last chapter. He continues here. He continues his denunciation of the evil in Israel, and specifically here he rebukes judges and law keepers who had warped justice and that used that warped justice to trouble the poor and to take things that belong to widows and, take advantage of needy people, helpless people, basically. God warned that they would have nowhere to run when his justice came searching for them. Section number 2, kind of the key section of this chapter: Assyria, the tool of God, verses 5 through 19. Next, God turns his attention away from Israel and towards the Assyrian Empire. He began by reminding Assyria that they were just a small pawn in his world. The Assyrian king thought that he was a lot more than that. He really thought himself to be God. He thought his power came from his army and his intellect, and he fancied himself as the one who kind of reshaped the earth and redrew the borders and boundaries of the nations and tore down enemy kingdoms. The Assyrian monarch considered the God of Israel to be just another weak idol like those of the nations that he had already managed to conquer. But God, through Isaiah, reminds the king of Assyria that he is just a very small man, a very small thing in comparison to the true God of heaven. And God would employ him and his nation as a tool to accomplish God's will. He would serve the God of Israel, and he was so simple that he wouldn't even know that he was doing it as he was doing God's work. God would use the Assyrians to punish the sinful people of Israel, but then God would humble the pride of the Assyrian Empire. So he's going to use Assyria as a tool, but then he's going to turn around and turn on them and humble them. Assyria is described like a strong man and a mighty forest, but God promised that he's going to make it into a famished, withering man and a field with just a few flimsy trees. Verses 20 through 27, then, the remnant of God's people. God promised that as Assyria conquered Israel and attempted to conquer Judah, he would preserve a remnant of the people. Though the Assyrian threat was going to be pretty significant, God's people were not to fear total extermination. God would eventually remove the burden of the Assyrians by judging them and humbling them, as we've just mentioned. And this is a theme that runs through the prophets a lot, this idea of the remnant, that even though the people of God are not always faithful to him, God is going to work through a small group of them to bring about his will, and ultimately to bring about the Messiah, to sit a king on the throne of David, and God's going to use that small group of people to fulfill all of his promises that he promised were coming through this specific people. And then finally, in verses 28 through 34, Assyria's march on Jerusalem and the Lord's acts of judgment. Acts, A-X-E, not A-C-T-S. Verses 28 through 32 are a poetic description of the Assyrian army marching on Jerusalem. But remember, it's not going to be conquered. Verses 33 and 34 are a poetic description of God meeting the Assyrian army at the hill of Jerusalem. And who do you think is going to win that battle? Assyria's army is described as a forest, just as it was in verses 18 and 19, and God is pictured as opposing them with a timber axe, ready to hew the mighty forest to the ground. And you can read about the fulfillment of this poetic prophecy in 2 Kings 19:24 through 26. So go check that out if you have time. All right, so that's our text. What can we take away from it? Let's talk application. Proud and arrogant people who refuse to be shaped by their Maker will be used by him as hammers to refine the righteous and shape history on the anvil of God's will. The wicked who resist the Maker will be made into his tools to shape the righteous people, the people who are willing to be shaped into his image. The king of Assyria was a highly arrogant person. We can read about that other places in the Bible. So God used him to refine his people and to steer human history in the direction that he wanted. There may be proud and haughty and unrepentant people in your life. You can maybe think of some examples. But also think of how God may have shaped you for the better through their negative influence. And that could be something as simple as showing you what you don't want to grow up to be, or showing you how you don't want to act, or showing you what a person with no character acts like, and you being resolved that I'm not going to turn into that. That might be one way, but there's other ways as well that God could use them. Their presence in your life may be jarring and may be unpleasant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unfruitful. Every blacksmith has a few blunt instruments for pounding out the steel, turning it into the shape that he wants it to go into before refining it further. Maybe God will use a few proud people in our lives to shape us into the people that we need to be. This application in part came from a personal experience that directly relates to this channel, and I can't remember if I've ever told this story before, but the way that I got into making videos was actually there was a young guy who was brought into our church years ago to kind of start like a media ministry, I guess you could call it. And at first everything went well, and I kind of joined this media ministry with a bunch of other people. But it turns out that the guy who was running it was really kind of selfish, really quite arrogant, very proud, very resistant to recognizing his own sins. And the whole project kind of imploded, and it was considered a failure. But I got a little bit of a taste for what we were doing there, and I decided there. I never considered ever doing this kind of media work or teaching the Bible online or anything like that. And because of this failed project, I got a taste for it. And I was like, well, maybe I can carry this on, even though the project is kind of blown up and at the local church, and it kind of just turned into, no one was doing anything with it. And so that's how I started, and that's how I started this YouTube channel. So I always think about that. It's like there's this guy who is a terrible influence, very proud, very just all about himself, but ultimately he inspired, I think, something that's been a net positive, which is this channel. So God used him as a tool to maybe shape something that could be beneficial, even though he wasn't what he should have been at the time. So anyway, that's our application for today. I'm sure that story took us over 5 minutes, but that is what inspired the application today. So figured maybe you'd be interested. All right, if you would like, and I hope you do, join me tomorrow as we take on chapter 11 that has even more important prophecies in it. We've already talked about a bunch. We'll talk about more tomorrow, Lord willing.